Today's chat is on Group Guru. This is really just an introduction to the subject. It's not definitive by any means. And when we talk about Group Guru, we shouldn't think, oh, okay, we're Group Guru now. It's going to take a few hundred years to develop, and hopefully today's talk will give you a little bit of a reason or understanding of why it's going to take that long. But first, let's just start with the idea of guru. Guru is a really simple word. It just means teacher. So does lama, so does sensei, so does teacher. Teacher means teacher. So when we talk about the guru principle, we're really talking about the learning principle, the teaching principle. So teaching is everywhere in life. There's no life that we live that isn't involved teaching. It's how we learn everything. If mother doesn't speak to us, if mother doesn't talk, she doesn't teach us how to speak, we never learn how to speak. So you could summarize it and say, well, life is guru, just living is guru, insofar as living is a teaching. You're growing and unfolding as you go along. So it's not a big jump to go from an individual teacher to a group teacher if you consider life as nothing other than a teaching. The guru is like a guide, a mentor, advising principle, an understanding. A professor at a university or is a guru in a sense. And of course, if you go to India, then everybody's guru. Guru Nanak's bicycle repair shop. I guess he teaches bicycle repair. So when it comes to the embodiment of guru, the guru principle, then you're talking about a beacon, or a lighthouse, or a reference point, something to direct you or lead you in a certain direction. And so mom and dad are our first gurus. They are our first teachers. They are our first instructors. Typically, of course, the word guru is saved for a spiritual teacher. And that's okay, as long as we understand that the difference between a spiritual teacher and a normal teacher is just basically what they're teaching and what their motivation is, and we'll get to that in a minute. You could think basically that the guru is also like a guiding light or a star or a lighthouse, something that helps you focus your direction. All teaching, by definition, is training. So there is no such thing as learning without training. Right? Everything you learned how to do in your life is a training. You learn how to be an electrician, you learn how to be a carpenter, you learn how to be a teacher. So this idea of guru, teaching, and training are all synonymous. They're all the same things. So when you go to university, you're getting trained in or college or whatever, your craft school or your trade school, or apprentice program, you're being trained. Typically, the ego doesn't like this word training because it feels like control or somebody's in charge. But fundamentally, if you're learning something from somebody else, they are, in a sense, in charge. That's different from receiving information and knowledge versus somebody being in charge of your life. And the problem with the guru principle in its negative connotation, or the priest or the pope or the bishop or whoever, the school teacher, your parents, is that they become controlling factors rather than teaching factors. So it's okay if you want to throw out the parents or the pope or the whatever as a spiritual teacher or guru, but don't think that you're ever throwing out the idea of training or the guru principle in terms of learning. Because if you do that, you're sort of dead-ended. You're no longer growing or unfolding. So in that sense, the Buddhists, in my opinion anyway, the Buddhists got it straight right from the beginning. They called the Buddha a trainer. And basically a teacher. They called him a trainer. They didn't call him a god, or they didn't call him, some top-down authoritarian figure. It was basically a trainer, somebody who can train you, the student, in the ways in which you, the student, choose to be trained in order to accomplish or to meet certain goals or aspirations. So that's the introductory idea. So let's look at where we are now. There are difficult times ahead, and there have always been difficult times ahead, and there will always be difficult times ahead. Life is a series of difficult times. We have a lot of great times too, fantastic, wonderful, great times, and those we celebrate. But typically most of what we need to learn, or where we learn to grow, or where we learn to develop, or where we learn to become bigger, better people, if you want to use that term, is where we're challenged, because of course that's the nature of training. It's a challenge. If you're not challenged in your life, or if you're not meeting challenges or rising to challenges in your life, you're probably not learning anything. You're probably repeating what you already know. So granted, these challenges we're facing today and these days seems bigger and broader, but fundamentally that's partly because of our time in history. We're cusping from Pisces, we're cusping out of Pisces and into Aquarius, and we're on the downside of the sine wave Aquarius. So we're coming in on the down slope of Aquarius. So this is why things are difficult. We're going through a transition. We're going through a phase change. And as we move from Pisces and the Jesus and the fish and the Virgin into the Aquarian, eclectic, more open-ended, more flowing, more free-form ways of living and engaging with each other, there's a what do you call it, a air pocket or a shockwave, and we're in the middle of the shockwave. So try to see what's going on as historically relevant as well as kind of just irritating. And we're also more interconnected on the planet than we've ever been. Everybody's connected to everybody with the internet and Facebook and social media and et cetera, et cetera. So this is upping the ante on connective power. So where you have one or two, you have a mathematical formula, 1, 2, 3, 4. But with the internet and our technology, we're going 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. We're exponentializing our growth curve, and therefore we're exponentializing our challenges worldwide, from domestic disputes to relationship disputes to gender identities to racism and who's in charge of the world, capitalism, so on. So these are difficult times. But again, with more interactions, more tensions, there are also more opportunities. There's more room to move, more room to grow. On the positive side, you have team. You have great team efforts. You have, science now does most of what they do in teams. So the teams are producing huge breakthroughs because they work better, more power in a team, exponential again. So we could call group guru in its highest manifestation understanding and compassion. A planetary-wide compassion and understanding. That would be kind of a simple group guru idea. Where a group guru idea on the physical plane would be scientists working on a team, or engineers working on a project, or medical people doing it, like when you have 5 or 6 doctors doing a heart operation together. Right? That's all group guru. One is kind of more about the material level, and the other is more about the spiritual level. So when we talk about group guru, we're talking about groups of individuals working together to serve the function of a group, of the guru principle. It's not a huge change really philosophically. It's just a huge change in terms of who gets to wear the red hat. So I guess eventually we'll have 8 people sitting here with a red hat on. So insofar as the highest principle is compassion and understanding, then that's the core meaning of spiritual group guru. And then how it manifests is something else. So like we said, there are promises and challenges. Here, for instance, the challenges to group guru are going to be things like the nuclear family and exclusive pair bond relationships, and that's a whole subject for another time. Capitalism, where it's just the money and property just held in certain hands. Nationalism, all the places where our ego identifies as being separate and individual and clings and holds onto that position at the expense of being able to work and see and live in each other's arms as a team, is Piscean. And that's going to start shifting. It's already shifting as we move into group guru. We're not talking about the end of the individual. In fact, in order to have group guru, we actually need super strong individuals, because the individual has to be able to let go of their boundary issues about being right or wrong, or their emotions, or their feelings, or their attachments and aversions in terms of working with other people in groups, in order to make it work well. Still, it promises the downgoing of things. Group guru promises the downgoing of things like racism. These old Piscean modalities of who are the elite, who's the in-group, who has the power are going to be falling away. Gender identity, any kind of identity thing that goes on in terms of gender or race or nation or caste, or whether you're the rich people, all of these kind of defining elements of separation that we've been using for centuries, tens of centuries, are going to slowly dissolve with group guru as people come together more. Again, it's going to take a while, and start recognizing that we're all in this together. And the nice, I suppose, the upside of environmental and social problems is that we really are facing the idea we don't have any choice. You know, we can't sit in our corner of Western Canada and think that we're no longer connected to China or India or anywhere else. So this sense of interconnectedness is in some ways going back to tribal, but we're substituting out the tribal of my little group of Hurons or my little group of Ojibways or my little group of white people or my little group of green people, right, are somehow separate and can act independently of the whole, is part of what's going to disappear as we go forward. And in order to do that, we're going to have to restructure and remodel how we work together. We don't have to worry about race. That's not going to be an issue, because in 100 years, we're going to all be brown. Eventually, the whole thing, humanity, is going to homogenize into kind of a common color. It's already happening, so that kind of takes out the race problem. But it doesn't take out the caste problem. It doesn't take out the elitism problem. And right now, our elitists are basically called limbic capitalists. We've substituted out feudal lords and kings and queens for limbic capitalism. This too will fall apart because fundamentally it can't be supported globally. And if nature can't support it, nature finds a way to take it out of the picture. We're in a war. We've always been in a war, and we'll always be in a war. Then you have your physical wars, right, like World War II or World War III. But because of the nature of the dissolution of the nature of the society of the Piscean Age, the wars of the future are not going to be international. They're not going to be global. They're going to be local. What we're seeing with the breakdown of the Piscean Age is we're seeing the squabbles become more local. America's pulling itself apart on Republican Democrat, right? That's inside the family. And more like revolutions or civil wars are going to be the battles that people are going to be fighting. You can call the Russian and Ukrainian thing a family dispute, right? So this is kind of be the outer battle. But the real battle isn't really the outer one. The real battle is based on something behind that. And the real battle behind that is a spiritual war, or a spiritual battle. And the spiritual battle is about view. It's about your view. It's about your understanding. How do you identify? Who do you identify with? You identify with men, then the battle will be with women. If you identify with Irish, the battle's going to be with the British. If you identify as French, the battle's going to be with everybody. Sorry, that was a joke if you're French. My mother, by the way, I get to do this because my mother was French. So anyway, this transition from fighting external battles, trying to keep my caste and my group and my elite on the top, and be clear, if you're white, you're fighting to keep the white people on top whether you know it or not, right? Because that's where the power is, so that's where you identify, so that's where you cling, and that's where you're hanging on to. So if you're in Africa, you would be silly to be white. You've got to be black, right? Because that's where the power is. That's where it lies. But anyway, these external battles are illusory. They're based on a view about self. And when we start talking about the spiritual battle, it's a different battle. The spiritual battle is not external against some other people. The spiritual battle is within oneself about one's views about separation and individuality and what they hold. Traditionally, teachers, guides, mentors, gurus, have always been arguing this point: view comes first. And so when we come to teaching and training, mostly what we're teaching and training is taking apart the view that you hold, that holds you in a state of separation, hurt, trauma, self-defensiveness, etc., 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 because that view of separation or that view of isolation or that view of protection is the war you're fighting. In other words, The hurt is? Protection. The nature of protection is the hurt. Hurt is the protection. The fighting against the elitism or the casteism or all of that, capitalism gone wild, is eventually going to lead to a revolution of sorts. But all we do when we fight the outer war is we substitute one group of power for another group of power. So if we take out the white people, if some other group steps in, they will be just as bad. Because the nature of elitism is to cause the elite. So the real demon out there is not race, it's not gender, right? It's not who's in control. I mean, that's just an outer manifestation of the real problem. And the real problem is rooted in self-delusion. And the self-delusion that we carry is all based on hype. It's all based on marketing. We dress it up in cheap fabric. We parade it around as smug self-entitlement, right? Try to include as much self-indulgence as we can. Masquerading as cool chic on the internet or whatever, like influencers. Priding itself on being modern. And if we believe fake news, it's because we want to. It's entertaining. We'd rather be entertained by fake news than just get rid of it. Aren't you tempted when you go on the internet, those little banners on the side that say, 10 worst bathing suit disasters? I mean, doesn't your mind just kind of, oh, I got it, right? I want to be entertained. And entertainment is a form of self-delusion. Entertainment is a form of trying to distract yourself from the fact of the discontent of the view of self that needs something to distract itself from. I'm not against entertainment. Entertainment's great. But look at it for how you use it. We kind of buy into the fake truth, into fake news, because we don't believe anything anymore. We don't believe anything anymore because we've been marketed to so much and sold things that don't last and yada, 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 right? We have a dryer, new washer and dryer, the button broke. It's good for... So you see the battle. The ego thinks if I fight the battle on the outside and I change things, I'll be okay. But it doesn't. It just goes on and on and on, generation to generation. So the spiritual battle, the spiritual guru is training you to pull the view back, pull the view back. What is the view that you're holding? What is the view that you have that holds you in place in terms of suffering and struggle? And those are the places you cling in. Those are the places that cause struggle. And that's where the teaching comes in. The teaching comes in to say, okay, this particular view or this particular attitude or this particular relationship or this particular form of clinging or attachment or aversion or whatever is causing you your suffering. And you become spiritual when you go, yeah, you're right. Now you really become spiritual when you start to do something about it. Going to classes is great, but eventually if you want the revolution of view that brings you into a place where you can participate in group guru as part of the guru experience manifesting. You need to do the work to disidentify with whatever place you hold an identity or a clinging or attachment. Our best doctors have always been liberators, and our best doctors are spiritual teachers. And they're liberators for that reason. Liberating is not easy because the patient, that's you, resists us, resists the medicine. So the great individual that we all worship, whether it's Tiger Woods on the golf course or Barack Obama or I don't know, who do you want to put in there? Is typically a mirror for the elite. Is typically a mirror for the elite. Now the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa and whoever else you want to talk about are exceptions. Because they're serving a function, they're not serving a personality. Mother Teresa is serving a function, spiritual liberator, decrease of suffering for people. The Dalai Lama is a spiritual liberator, right? It's not on about him being the guy. In fact, I hear the Dalai Lama is talking about now that perhaps not, that the incarnation of individual lamas will not be happening in the future, that they'll be manifesting more as eclectic groups. Interesting, eh? Okay, so that's the ballpark. How do we get home? To heal the world soul, the first thing we need is stillness and quietude and a peaceful environment in which to catch our breath. Solitude, quiet, and a peaceful environment so you can connect with exactly how you feel in your being in this moment, at this time, without a distraction. Cities are great for discoveries and richness. I love them. But the symphony won't help your illness. The symphony won't help your trauma. And nature has always shown the way of balance. But we tend to dismiss it as boring. Need something more happening. So we tend not even to sit in nature quietly. we tend to find something to do. Anyway, the point here being all great mystics are born out of solitude and silence. Once you get comfortable with solitude and silence, then the natural result of that is ecstasy. No, not the drug, right? The experience. If you can live in nature, in the still silent peacefulness of this moment without needing to run around, accomplish something, do something, get somewhere, etc., then you can live in the world with people and pollution and all the fears and all the troubles because you found your core. And the key to group guru is the key to the core of the individual. The individual has to come into their core. Peaceful, silent, quiet, inactive, completely at rest, happy there, happy to sit there, happy to remain there. And now, therefore, happy to move, happy to engage, happy to work at it. But not needing to do it out of a rejection of the core of one's being. If you do this, by the way, then you can live with your fears. You can live with the fears, you can live with the problems because you know your core isn't touched by them. They bounce around the outside of it. They're not the center of you, they're the outside of the center. The center of you is stillness, the fears and problems and all that stuff, emotions, sickness, death. These are all just issues around the core. Right? And when you can sit there, then you can live. You can live with loneliness and abandonment and old age and sickness and death. It's okay, because that's happening around the outside of the core. That's not the core element. Traditionally, the guru's role has been to support and press you to find your own strength and resilience. That's their only job. And they try to take away or diminish or remove or lower the barriers of protection, right, that keep you from finding that core resilience and that core strength. But you, the ego, not whoever, we use our defenses and our protections to try to protect our core because we think it's weak or it's damaged or there's something wrong with it or I don't have the strength. And that's the illusion. That's the mistake of the ego's message, right? The transcendent ego, the spiritual ego, has no such issues. It's not terrified of anything. So the guru's job is the guru principle, the teaching principle, you're with me on the guru principle. The guru principle is to remove the confusion and the fear and the trauma around the outside. But this takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of resistance. And you run into all sorts of things along the way, like issues around money, issues around sex, issues around power, issues about family, relationship, all of it. And in the process, by the way, of lowering these boundaries, mistakes happen. Everybody's fallible in terms of what happens in the work through, right? Shit happens, it's not always great. But the point is that if you keep going, you make the journey. A bad teacher cannot hurt a good student. A bad teacher doesn't have the power to hurt a good student because a good student just keeps going through it. If your motivation is compassion and your motivation is loving kindness, that will take you through anything. However, it takes time to mature. So we come to group guru. In the same way that history had great individuals like Buddha, Lao Tzu, Plato, Aristotle, Galileo, so on, so our spiritual future will be innovated by great teams, as we mentioned with the science, or we mentioned with medicine. Right? So the breakthroughs are coming because there's just too much for one being to integrate. Right? That's why we're having teams in the outer world. So we're going to have teams in the spiritual world for the same reason. There's just too much going on for one person to address it all. So too with egos. Our egos are interlaced in the web, and it requires more and more teams to sort out what's going on anywhere. A monastery and a nunnery is your original team guru. Right? The nunnery or the monastery was a group of people working together for a common cause, and the monasteries of Europe were for education, and training and maintaining the teaching and keeping Plato and Aristotle alive in spite of all the noise about it. Right? And to teach the people how to read and write and try to keep it together through the dark ages. So the transitions are going to be rocky as we move forward, and group relations are going to be a battle. It's going to be work to put this together because the ego's been raised to be separate. But in order to build the foundation for group guru, we need to come to terms with our own hurts and our own pains and our own fears and say enough, enough, enough. Enough with my problems, enough with my hurts, enough with my traumas. What can I do? How can I participate? What can I join in to work and develop compassion, loving kindness in a team situation so we can reach more people? It takes a lot of people here at Clear Sky and Planet Dharma to make this happen, for me to sit in this chair. To do this, we need strong individuals. People who are no longer paralyzed or traumatized or shut off or shut down by their hurts, their fears, their inadequacies, whatever, and are willing to get at it, get to the core, get to that still, silent place in your being that's happy to sit in an empty room doing nothing for a year or 6 months, whatever, however long, forever, if, you know, because that mind is never bored, that mind is never restless. Only the ego is bored and only the ego is restless. And that's what's going to keep guru from actually coming together. So we need to get to there. And from there, then we come together. We come together and we work as a team. Lest you fear that this is the end of individualism, it isn't. Curiously enough, group guru is the beginning of true individualism, not ego strutting, posturing, game playing. So let's get at it.